In this last video of the population ecology series, I want to take the time to tell you about life histories and connect all of the things we have learned regarding population ecology to our understanding of human populations and what lays ahead in our future from an ecological point of view. Let's begin by looking at the concept of a life history. A life history is going to be all of those key events and strategies a population will rely on in order to successfully maintain its presence in a community. In a life history, we want to look at the age where reproduction begins. For some organisms, reproduction can happen hours they finish developing, or sometimes it can be many years after they've reached a maturity level in terms that the whole body has been already completed its development. We can also look at how often organisms reproduce. For some, reproduction is going to be timed to a yearly event, a yearly type of a calendar. Others can reproduce throughout the year. Some may have reproduction time to the cycles of the moon. We can also see how many offspring are produced with each reproductive cycle. And so all of these events are shaped by natural selection and favor populations that can develop the best strategy. The best strategy for one species and one population will be completely different for the strategies of another population. So to understand how this all unfolds, it may be convenient to look at a table like the one you see now on the screen. Here we're looking at two sides of a coin, two idealized life histories. And what we know is that in reality, for most populations, even though some can follow one type of life history, others at the opposite side of life history, most populations are going to be somewhere in between. There's a broad gray zone in between these two types of life histories I'm about to describe to you. What are the two strategies? One is known as the R-selected life history or opportunistic. I like the word opportunistic because it describes what happens to many of these populations. If conditions are right, if the environment's providing the best opportunities and resources, then there are some populations that must use exactly of that time, of that moment, because there's no guarantee of next month or even next year. Those are going to be our selected populations because here the strategy is going to be produce as many offspring as possible, having a high birth rate in hopes that even if there is a high mortality rate, there will be a few organisms that will still manage to survive to a reproductive age. In contrast, case-selected populations are going to be those where organisms that manage to live at carrying capacity, the carrying capacity of the environment, are going to be the ones that will be the most successful. As I mentioned to you before when we explored exponential growth and logistic growth, in the case of logistic growth, which is where we see K, the carrying capacity, organisms that are longer lived, produce fewer offspring, have larger bodies, are more likely to follow that logistic growth model, and in this case are more likely to have this equilibrial or case-selected type of life history. I like the word equilibrium because it tells you that these are populations that will maintain equilibrium by living near carrying capacity. So let's look at some of the strategies. For example, the time it takes for the body to mature is going to be short for our selected species. Think about insects that complete the development in just a few days versus something like large mammals, which have a longer maturation time. Gestation period in an elephant alone is 2 years. Gestation period in humans is about 9 months. And so there is a longer time needed to produce a body that can function, a mature body. If you look at the lifespan, those are selected species, the ones that are favored by having high birth rates, these are going to have a short lifespan. Whereas those that have more of a case-selected type of a life history live longer. For that reason, one can say that the type of environment where they live is going to be more predictable, and so they can have strategies for surviving from one year to the next. Death rates in our selected populations is going to be often high. These are going to be those populations that will likely have a type 3 survivorship curve. If you remember, the type 3 survivorship curve is going to be that where mortality is just so high. Most members born on a year die. The numbers go down real quickly, and only a few survive through most of the lifespan. Whereas the death rates on case-selected populations are usually going to be low at first because of parental care. Most young will be alive throughout most of their infancy and youth and even middle ages, and it's not until they are really old that the numbers go down, that mortality rates will increase. Look at this one here. For our selected populations, the number of offspring produced per reproductive episode will be many. For case selected will be few. I told you before, this is a numbers game for our selected species. They're hoping to produce a large number of offspring in hopes that a few will survive, reproduce, and carry on with the task of preserving that population in the community for generations to come. Case selected species and populations are going to produce few offspring. And this is connected to parental care. I'm going to skip to this part down here because for case-selected species, producing a few offspring is a large task. It is extensive parental care. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort. These are selected species produce many offspring, but there's no parental care. So all they have to do is sometimes reproduce once in a lifetime. That's what we see here. Leave all the offspring fend off by themselves, and hopefully some will make it through. Here, reproduction for case-selected species is going to be several through intervals, like I said, yearly or every 2 or 3 years. And the size of the offspring or the eggs is usually small for our selected, and it's going to be larger for case-selected species. What does that all have to do with human populations? See, by now you've learned that humans are going to be more of a case-selected population. Humans are going to have more of a type 1 survivorship curve. Most members of a human population will be alive through most of the lifespan and then die later in life. And that affects the way in which we use the environment and depend on the environment. When you look at headlines regarding human populations, you see things like deforestation. Why do we need trees? Species extinction. Why are the species going extinct in different parts of the world, including here in the United States? Oil spills. Why do we see more and more of these? Climate change. The climate is changing everywhere, not in the same fashion or at the same rate, but climate is changing. And many ecologists and economists argue that the root cause of all of these ecological and environmental problems is the rapid rate of growth for the human population. Think about it. For me, it makes sense. If we have more people on this planet, we're going to need more wood for building more homes. We're going to need more resources for furnishing the homes. That is going to require sometimes using areas for building more neighborhoods. The destruction of habitat comes with sometimes the decline in species numbers, population numbers, and that can lead to extinction. And why do we have so many oil spills? Well, the more people we have, we need more energy, and that energy, like electricity and other forms of energy we rely on, it's obtained by the burning of fossil fuels, petroleum, oil. And climate change, while a lot of climate change happens naturally because of cyclical patterns of planet Earth, there's a great deal of climate change that is happening because of human activities and how we are using and extracting resources from this planet. And so a rapid rate of human population. The more humans we have on this planet, the greater of these problems are going to be, and more frequently we're going to be seeing them. So to understand human populations and where we are right now, it is estimated that at present we have about 7.7 billion people. When I began teaching 20 years ago, there was only 6 billion people on Earth. Now we've got to 7.7 billion people. The human population continues to increase at a rate of 2.2 humans per second. Let's just round it to 2. And you can begin counting by twos every second. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. And just since the moment I started counting, we have 20 more people on this planet. It is a clock that keeps on ticking 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so the rate of growth is not even, as you can see here in these age structure diagrams. There are some countries in the world where there's going to be more of this birth rate. If you look at this set of numbers over here, this is going to be the ages of people in a population. And so at the base of this graph, we see infants and newborns. Then we see people in their teenage years, and we see the young adults, and then we see middle age, and then we see the older group of any society. A place like Afghanistan, a place like Mexico, and many other Latin American countries, like the country I came from El Salvador, have this type of an age structure diagram that looks like a pyramid. And this is bad news for the economy, because it means that the greater number of children, when these children, remember, most of them will be alive by the time they reach their teens and the young adult age, there's going to be a greater number of people here having children. And so the base of this pyramid continues to get wider and wider and wider. That's not the same case in every country of the world. In the United States, our growth seems to be relatively stable. We still have a positive rate of growth, and that is largely the result of immigration. It's largely the result of a good economy. Sometimes when the economy is good, more people have more children, and things are even more different, contrasting to what you see in a place like Afghanistan or Mexico or another developing country. If you look at a place like Italy and many places in Europe like Germany and England, at the base, there is few children, and that's because people in this group of society, the reproductive age group, many of them are not having as many children as they used to. In fact, the population, human population, can stabilize at a zero population growth if couples on average have 2 children. And so what happens in many European countries is that couples are having less than 2 children, sometimes 1, sometimes 0, but the average number of children per couple is definitely less than 2. And eventually there's going to be severe economical problems that can only be solved if they allow more people to come in from other parts of the world. What a thought, huh? Immigration can help save an economy if you're dealing with negative population growth. And so to maintain a human population that is stable, a human population that is at carrying capacity, whatever that carrying capacity number can be, there are 2 ways to achieve it. One is going to be by having high birth rates, like we see in still many parts of the world, followed by high death rates. And be careful here with what I'm saying here. I'm not advocating that this is how it should be. I'm actually hoping that this is not the case. But for a population to be stable, if you're having a large number of births, it can only be stable if you're having a large number of deaths, and nobody wants that. And so what we want to see is this demographic transition from this point to the next alternative to reach a stable population size for humans. We can achieve it if we have low birth rates and also low death rates. And this is the reason many of you are going to school, because you want to be a doctor, and because you want to be a dentist, and because you want to be a pharmacist. And all of these careers are helping keep low death rates. That's a wonderful thing. That's a good thing. But it means that somehow we must find a balance by keeping also low birth rates. And who's going to make that decision? In my opinion, it should be completely up to individuals. We shouldn't have the government. institutionalizing like a number of births couples can have, like it's happened in China. And most of you are aware of this, that China imposes severe penalties, taxes on couples that have 2 children or more. And so it's almost legislated. Couples in China are allowed to have only 1 kid, and it hasn't solved the problem of overpopulation in China. But yet, there's that legislation, right? And so what kinds of social changes and what kinds of decisions can we make as individuals to help achieve that zero population growth around this point where we are 7.7 billion people? It's a serious question. And I hope if you're listening to me and thinking about these problems, maybe you're thinking, what is the carrying capacity for humans on this planet? Some people have suggested that our carrying capacity is going to be at about 10 billion. And that number makes me nervous because just at 7.7 billion, the changes in our planet, the limited resources in many parts of the world, maybe not here in the United States, are so severe. If you've never traveled outside of the United States, you have no idea the levels of poverty and hunger and stress in which many poor people live. And so, I don't know. I think that there is definitely a better way of doing things. And what would that be? You can have an argument about what you think is best. I can have mine. Something has to be done. That's what I'm saying. So if you look at the rate of population growth for humans, for many decades, it was an exponential growth. And you can see that in this graph. You can see the exponential growth. We are not growing exponentially anymore, but we're still growing real rapidly. And so when is this growth going to level off? The global population for humans is estimated to be at about 8.1 to 10.6 billion in 2050. I think at the rate we're going right now, it's probably going to be around that 10 billion mark, unless something changes. And what will be the thing that changes? What will be those factors that control human population growth? Well, if we look at history, something that controlled population growth back in the Dark Ages, in the 1300s, 1400s, it was the plague. The plague was a horrible disease transmitted to humans by rodents. Poor sanitation in cities that were overcrowded led to this. And I'm sorry, I'm not getting emotional here, just allergies. And diseases, could it be an outbreak of a disease? Could it be a flu? The flu has killed people by hundreds of thousands in the United States historically. And so what would it be? Could it be limited food supply, contamination of water, wastes? We don't know. We can't tell you for sure, but all of these things I'm telling you, limited water, limited food, and wastes, which lead to the increase in spread of diseases, is having an effect on human populations in different parts of the world. It's already happening. It can only get worse if the pattern of human growth continues to be what it is. So we're dealing with a planet that is in crisis. And if you're thinking about, well, where do I fit into this? The problem with the United States is not the size of the human population. We only make up about 5% of the human population, if I'm not mistaken. And yet we consume here a great deal of resources. And this is where you can take action. Many people are big into the whole recycling, and recycling is a good thing. I'm not against it. I'm quite in favor of it. I'm more like, let's use less stuff. If I had one lesson that I wanted to pass to all of my students, every time I have a new group of students, a new cohort, using language from this chapter, is use less stuff. If you look at the consumption of goods in this country alone, about 25 to 30% of fossil fuel is used for the U.S. supply the needs for energy for the U.S. population. We consume about 40% of necessary and luxury goods. That includes clothing, technology, smartphones, watches, shoes, all of those things. And consequently, we end up generating about 8 times more waste than a person in an undeveloped country. And so if we can use less stuff, there's going to be less waste produced. There's going to be less consumption of energy. And it would avoid the need for recycling. And so that's why I carry my water bottle when I go to class. I'm not buying plastic water bottles and adding to the amount of waste that goes into the landfills. And so, maybe we'll have a little conversation about this in class as well. I think it'll be a good topic for conversation, and I want to hear what you also think about that. But for the time being, this is it. I hope you're having a good time exploring concepts of ecology, and in this case, population ecology. That's all that I have for you. I'll see you in class. Goodbye.